All right, good afternoon, everyone. Since speakers will be flooding in a couple minutes, I just wanted to kick everything off by welcoming everyone to the final round of the Extemp uh, division here at the ETOC for 2020. I will first just want to say congratulations to all the finalists for getting to this round. It's very big for them to do so, and big congrats to them. Thank you to the tournament staff, observers, etc., and judges for making this a smooth process and cooperating with us when things went wrong or were more difficult than normal because of technology. And then on that note, I will introduce all of the speakers in order. So our first speaker will be from Plano West Senior High School. The name is Pranav Pada Thunaduvil. Our second speaker is from Hocken, name Molly Zhao. Third speaker, also from Hocken, Sam Lee. Our fourth speaker from Edina, Ananth Veluvali. Our fifth speaker from the Potomac School, Catherine Rollins. And our sixth speaker from Plano West Senior, Angela West. So a big congrats to them, and we look forward to seeing their speeches. And just a reminder to all of the observers and everything, stay muted and have your camera off during the duration of the speeches, and good luck for a final round on everyone.
Hi, I'm Pranav. I should be the first speaker. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I'm
You're kind of what? Sorry, I think you're cutting out. Oh, can you hear me or?
I can hear you, but it's very echoey.
Oh, okay. Should I
I
actually
can
try
hear
like
you fine.
reconnecting? Okay, let me like refresh the page and see if it fixes the problem.
I think the echo might be coming from your stream. That sounds better.
Is it better?
Speak again.
Better? Is it better?
No, I'm still hearing the echo. Do the other judges get an echo?
I do not get an echo.
I don't either.
Let me log out and I'll log back in. Give me 20
Okay.
seconds. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, you're good.
Pat, do you want to go ahead and tell us your question?
Yeah. My question is, will US efforts to achieve peace in Afghanistan succeed? Will US efforts to achieve peace in Afghanistan succeed?
Hello again. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, I can.
Much better. No echo now. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, the question is, will US efforts to achieve peace in Afghanistan succeed?
He's the owner of Prep, so I'm pretty sure he knows the question.
Oh, right. That's true. And am I timing myself?
Probably that's best.
Okay. Okay. A second. Sounds good. Ready? Under the Trump administration, there have been airstrikes that have killed 5 second-in-commands of the Afghan terrorist group, the Taliban. In fact, as far-right Breitbart News reported it, jobs increase under President Trump. But what we've seen with the Taliban so far is that despite this kind of killing from the Trump administration, their policy has also changed in recent years. In fact, as the Foreign Policy magazine further explains, on April 1st of 2020, that with 13,000 American troops within Afghanistan since the war began 14 years ago, the United States has also seen that there's been a change in policy. Now, they're negotiating with the Taliban's team within Doha, Qatar, and they've recently signed an agreement to reduce violence. But that is conditional upon the Taliban agreeing to negotiate with the Afghan government and ending their sheltering of terrorist groups such as ISIS. And considering that when NPR points out just 5 days ago that 15,000 civilians have already died within the Afghan war, it's our responsibility to ask, will US efforts to achieve peace in Afghanistan succeed? The answer is no, because the actors' situations on the ground are not conducive to peace. First, because of political instability within the Afghan negotiating team. Second, because of factionalism within the Taliban. And lastly, because of continued Pakistani support for militants. Now, the US attempt to create peace in Afghanistan relies upon the Taliban negotiating with the legitimately elected Afghan government. But the problem is, we don't even know what that government is. And so the first main reason as to why these efforts will not succeed is because of political instability within the government and their negotiating team. In fact, Al Jazeera further explains on April 2nd of 2020 that the attempt of the United States is failed by the fact that the recent election within Afghanistan saw that Dr. Abdullah and current President Ashraf Ghani are now disputing who's the actual president. And so when the United States cut $1 billion in aid until that political issue was resolved, they decided to put together a negotiating team of 21 individuals. The problem is that this team doesn't even know what they're negotiating for. That's further explained by Radio Free Europe on April 3rd of 2020. That this team includes supporters of President Ghani and members that support Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah. For example, the National Director of Security, Mazum Staneksai, was actually a hardliner who's on the team, and his entire policy at his intelligence agency has been hunting and killing anyone suspected of working with the Taliban. Meanwhile, there have also been supporters and politicians that support Mr. Ghani, who have a more conciliatory stance in supporting negotiations. Given that this team cannot work together on finding a coherent policy of working with the Taliban, they won't be able to reach a peace agreement with the Taliban either. At the end of the day, that means more war, and American efforts don't succeed. Now, while the Taliban has often been treated in foreign policy as just one group, they have several factions, an establishment, and a faction known as the Haqqani Network. And so the second main reason as to why US efforts will fail within Afghanistan is because of factionalism within the Taliban that prevents peace. As the Foreign Affairs magazine further explains on April 1st of 2020, that as part of the US effort to create peace within Afghanistan, the United States decided to work with a negotiating team of 31 members that were sent by the Taliban's establishment faction to Doha, Qatar, which is where they negotiated a reduction of violence deal. But the problem is, this goes against the very principles of a different faction of the Taliban, known as the Haqqani Network. As PBS NewsHour further explains on March 30th of 2020, that the Haqqani Network is a far more hardline faction of the Taliban led by Sirajuddin Haqqani. Their entire doctrine is the idea that there should never be any kind of negotiation or communication with the West or a Western-backed government, such as that in the Afghanistan government right now. As a result, when the establishment faction decided to work with the US government and the Afghan government right now, it meant that there were several members within the Taliban, a lot of members actually, that felt they were breaking their promises. The Taliban's very idea has been no negotiation with the West. And when that promise was broken, more and more members from within the Taliban, the establishment faction, are now moving towards the Haqqani Network, which is exactly why the Radio Free Europe further explains on April 3rd of 2020 that this specific faction of Afghanistan, or the Taliban specifically, has only been increasing its aggression. For example, taking over a district headquarters within northeastern Afghanistan in Balochistan, showing us that this idea of peace isn't going to work when the Haqqani Network is spoiling that at the very moment right now. Now, Pakistan and their government has been accused of supporting a branch of ISIS known as ISIS-K, a regional terrorist group, or Kellogg's least popular brand of breakfast cereal. And so the third main reason as to why the problems within Afghanistan aren't going to see peace now with the US is because of continued and increased Pakistani support for these militants. Now, The Economist magazine further explains on April 1st of 2020 that the US effort to create peace within Afghanistan relies upon a promise by the Taliban that they will no longer shelter or support any kind of terrorist group, including parts of ISIS that are there. But the problem with that specific US effort is it goes against what Pakistan strategically wants within Afghanistan. As the International Crisis Group further explains on April 1st of 2020, that what Pakistan has been doing since the beginning of the Afghan war is providing financial aid through their intelligence agency, the ISI, to the Khorasan group, a specific branch or ISIS-K that has been in Afghanistan. And this specific branch of ISIS has now seen increased financial aid from Pakistan secretly. And that's because the reason as to why Pakistan even supports this terrorist group is because they want to train and financially aid this group to attack rivals within India. So when they see that the Afghanistan government and the Taliban specifically are creating this promise to end terrorist support, that goes against what Pakistan wants, meaning increased financial aid and increased problems in terms of what ISIS can do. Clearly, peace isn't forthcoming. So coming back to today's question, will US efforts to create peace in Afghanistan succeed? The answer is no. First, because of negotiation issues. Second, because of Taliban factionalism. And lastly, because of militant support. So while the United States' actions might not have been creating jobs in Afghanistan, they aren't creating peace either. My time was 7:01 approximately. Thank you.
Digital applause. I'll get digital applause. Reaction. Congratulations on making it to the finals. I know you were in the room and you did the whole spiel. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm your second speaker, Molly. Are my judges ready for me?
Morning, Molly. Can you do
Good
this
morning.
favor of just giving us your question before you start?
Of course. My question today is US foreign policy under President Trump embracing isolationism over global engagement? Again, that is US foreign policy under President Trump embracing isolationism over global engagement?
And then are the judges ready?
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 And may I ask if it's okay if I time myself?
Yeah, perfect. That's totally
Okay.
fine.
Great, thanks. On the world's most reliable platform, Twitter, President Trump has stated that America is the best country in the world, which makes sense because with Florida reopening beaches in the middle of a global pandemic, we're clearly at the forefront of change. While America may be leading the international community in a few key areas, oftentimes we are leading on our own terms because the Hill writes on September 24th of 2019 that since 2017, President Trump and his administration have been decoupling the US's influence abroad, starting with climate change anywhere to military intervention. But considering that isolationism is threatening the US's role as a democratic leader in the international community, it becomes all the more imperative that we ask today's question. Is US foreign policy under President Trump embracing isolationism over global engagement? The answer is an absolute yes, because we are retracting democratic influence throughout the world. Let's examine this further through three key reasons. First, in withdrawing military forces in the Middle East. Second, in minimizing trade relations. And finally, but perhaps most importantly, in retracting and reducing foreign aid abroad. Vladimir Putin and President Trump are best buds. They share anything from tweets to elections to now the Middle East, bringing us to the first reason as to why the US is embracing isolationism over global engagement. It's because the US is withdrawing military forces in the Middle East. Let's take a look at the US's current strategy for Middle Eastern countries. As the BBC News writes on April 1st of 2020, that alongside reducing 5,300 troops from Middle Eastern countries such as Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, President Trump plans to cut foreign aid to the Middle East by over $250 million. This aid and these troops were primarily serving in countries that needed it the most, many ridden with authoritarian governments and facing massive humanitarian crises. But upon withdrawing troops as well as aid, the US is making a decision to prioritize isolationism and the interests of our own country over the well-being of others, primarily because after the United States left these countries, many others like China and Russia have aimed to fill its gap. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace tells us on March 30th of 2020 that ultimately, as the US left a massive power vacuum throughout the Middle East, withdrawing thousands of troops, Russia has aimed to fill the gap, primarily by extending diplomatic efforts towards governments such as Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's, as well as supplying massive amounts of military and economic aid. So we can see that because the US has ultimately made the decision to withdraw troops, as well as aid for the interests of our own military and economy, we've left several Middle Eastern countries out to dry with authoritarian states to ultimately fill the gap. But second, as President Trump has made it one of his key priorities to boost the US economy, he is instead doing the opposite. Because the second reason as to why President Trump is turning foreign policy for the United States from global engagement to isolationism is now because he is minimizing trade relations. In fact, the New York Times tells us on April 3rd of 2020 that President Trump aims to pull the United States out of the World Trade Organization, the WTO, an organization composed of over 160 countries around the world that grants free trade and access, as well as benefits in our trade relations. But essentially, because President Trump believes that the World Trade Organization is leading to more economic deficits for the United States rather than benefits, he's aiming to pull us out. And in trade decisions such as these, President Trump is making it clear that he wants to prioritize isolationism for our country's economy rather than the globalization. But again, this is ultimately leaving huge gaps in our international community, ones for other countries like China to fill. Let's turn towards the Belt and Road Initiative, essentially a maritime trade road across the world that China is expanding at a rapid pace. But in this trade initiative, as the Human Rights Watch tells us on April 15th of 2020, China has violated human rights at astronomical rates, with over 2,000 reported cases anywhere from human trafficking to unfair labor practices. It's clear that for the economic interests of our own country, President Trump is still choosing to turn towards isolationism over global engagement. But as trade remains a key sector of the US, as does foreign policy and aid itself, bringing us to the third and final way in which the US is turning towards isolationism is through reducing foreign aid. In the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, hundreds of countries are currently relying on foreign aid from countries like the US. For example, as the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace writes, again dated April 2nd of 2020, countries such as Mali are ultimately relying on the US for foreign aid. With only 3 ventilators per every million people, they are in dire need of financial and medical resources, ones that the US was previously crucial in providing. But as we turn towards an article written by Newsweek, dated April 10th of 2020, that writes that the US is aiming to cut foreign aid amidst the coronavirus pandemic by over 21%. It's clear to see that in times of crisis, the US is not turning towards global engagement and the well-being of millions of people, but instead turning back towards isolationism and the well-being of our own. Ultimately, as the US claims to be a democratic leader, we have to return back to today's question. Is US foreign policy under President Trump embracing isolationism over global engagement? The answer is a clear yes, because ultimately we are attracting influence in key ways. First, in withdrawing military troops from the Middle East. Second, in minimizing trade relations. And finally, in reducing foreign aid abroad. So while America, according to President Trump's 240 characters, might be the best country in the world, if the US continues to turn towards isolationism, we won't be holding on to the reins for much longer. Thank you. Right. And the time I reported was about 7:20.
I got 7:14. You're good.
Okay,
Congratulations on getting to the TOC final. We can give you some digital applause with our reactions.
Thank you. Thank you for all judging.
Of course.
Have a good one.
Are the judges ready for the third speaker?
I'm ready.
Yeah. Can you go ahead and give us your question?
Of course. So my question today for the judges and audience is the America First policy focus undermining US global leadership? Once again, is the America First policy focus undermining US global leadership?
And then whenever you're ready.
Great. President Trump loves to tout how his administration is unprecedented. And he's right. For example, President Trump is our only president to get impeached in his first term rather than his second. Even Nixon didn't have to worry about re-election chances. But President Trump's brashness is simply a key component of his entire administration. Foreign Affairs notes on April 2nd of 2020 that since his campaign, President Trump has adopted America First as his foreign policy doctrine. Essentially, in any international event, if America isn't the #1 benefiter, we shouldn't be a part of it. And it looks like President Trump is doing a great job, because in terms of coronavirus cases, America is definitely #1. But considering that the commander-in-chief is protecting 331 million Americans, both from domestic and foreign threats, it becomes imperative to ask today's timely question. Is the America First foreign policy focus undermining US global leadership? The answer is unfortunately yes, primarily because it's weakening our influence in crucial geopolitical matters. More specifically, first, increasing Chinese economic power across Asia. Second, encouraging European right-wing nationalism and isolationism. And finally, in allowing for Russian military interference in Middle East and North Africa. Now, President Trump, when it comes to China, has stated that once again, US-Chinese trade tensions have increased this year, as they have every year since 2000. But as these tensions reach a breaking point, China is the one being benefited. Because the first way that the America First foreign policy is ultimately undermining US global leadership is because it is increasing Chinese economic power across Asia. China is trying to recreate the Silk Road with its Belt and Road Initiative. According to the Washington Post, on March 18th of 2020, China has poured over $8 trillion in this massive infrastructure project, including pouring billions in countries like Pakistan and Malaysia. But the problem here is that China is engaging in debt trap diplomacy. To contextualize this, let's pretend that you're a client with a bank, and that bank allows you to take out excessive loans, and for a short while, you are very happy with all your money. But then suddenly, that bank expects you to pay back those loans with excessive amounts of interest. That's exactly what China has done with countries like Sri Lanka, forcing them into 99-year lease deals with the country. But instead of aiding these countries and out of Chinese economic traps, the United States is only focusing on its small portion of the world. Let's look at the USMCA, for example. According to Deutsche Welle, a German economic bank on March 20th of 2020, that the USMCA has been President Trump's primary focus, updating NAFTA and ultimately getting better access to things like Canada's dairy market or the United States. But things like the USMCA only address 3 countries out of about 200 in the entire world. A stark contrast to where we were before President Trump. Because Trump is so much more focused on America First in terms of economics, he is ultimately allowing China to take the reign and have way more economic influence and traps across the rest of the world. There's a reason why nationalism is usually on the right wing of the spectrum. They always believe they're right. Lame, but true. Making the second way, that the United States America First policy undermines global leadership, it's because it encourages European right-wing nationalism and isolationism. What exactly has this policy movement been in the continent? According to The Economist on March 13th of 2020, that right-wing nationalism in Europe started around the same time as the Trump campaign, leading to a rise in violent racist and xenophobic rhetoric in a political force. One of the tangible results was Brexit. According to The Guardian on March 20th of 2020, Brexit was making the UK the first ever EU ally to drop out of the organization, passing it in a 52-48 vote. But as the EU continues to fracture, instead of helping out our historic ally by re-putting together the pieces, America is only making things worse. According to the Wall Street Journal on April 2nd of 2020, President Trump has lambasted the EU military organization NATO by calling it obsolete and repeatedly threatening to withdraw US military presence, or approximately 70% of NATO strength. This has forced more authoritarian-leaning governments like Hungary and Poland to start developing their own military projects, while increasing their own authoritarian rule over their citizens, showing that instead of promoting liberals and democracy values across Europe, US America First policy only withdraws us from that crucial part of the world. and European governments continue to take more power over their citizens. Every year, Vladimir Putin likes to post pictures of himself shirtless, just to show how brave he is. But unfortunately, that's also the face he makes when he uses his powerful military to jail anybody that disagrees with him. Making the final way that America First policy is undermining US global leadership. It's because ultimately we're encouraging Russian military intervention in the Middle East and North Africa. Russia's military is its greatest strength. According to the Moscow Times on April 3rd of 2020, that Russia recently deployed 200 buses of troops to major Russian cities in an attempt to check in on people during the coronavirus, but also jailing anybody who was walking outside. But Russia has translated this military aggression across the Middle East and North Africa, and the US is nowhere to be seen. According to the Council on Foreign Relations on March 18th of 2020, that Russia has helped prop up the Assad regime in Syria from 2015 to now, and is now propping up the general in Libya, Khalifa Haftar, as he wreaks havoc across the Libyan nation. But because the United States won't engage with Russia in these military conflicts due to America First, they are forcing some of their most vulnerable populations in the Middle East and North Africa to be greeted by authoritarian troops rather than democratic troops that would care about their rights. So considering that America First is all about protecting the 331 million Americans right in this country, let's return to today's timely question. Is the America First policy focus undermining US global leadership? The answer is unfortunately yes, primarily because it is weakening our influence in geopolitical matters. More specifically, first, increasing Chinese economic power in Asia. Second, encouraging European right-wing nationalism. And finally, in allowing Russian military interference in the Middle East and North Africa. Trump loves to tout how his administration is unprecedented. But in order for American failures not to also be unprecedented during his administration, there needs to be some key changes to his beloved foreign policy. Great, thank you for judging.
Thank you. Congratulations on making it to finals.
Thank you.
Applause. Y'all, I'm gonna do that every time. That's gonna be annoying for y'all, but use your reaction buttons. Digital applause.
Hello.
Hello.
Awesome. So my question for the audience then is American exceptionalism on the brink of extinction? Again, is American exceptionalism on the brink of extinction?
David, Ian, are y'all good?
Good to go. Thank you.
Good.
Awesome. If you ever wanted President Trump to remove a white bulb, just tell him that President Barack Obama put it there. After all, from issues as innocuous as light bulbs to those as far-reaching as foreign policy, President Trump seems hell-bent on undoing President Barack Obama's legacy. And as explained by Foreign Policy magazine on January 16th of this year, the most recent way in which President Trump seems to have done that is by endorsing the tacit idea of putting America first. And while this introspection might benefit the US, when it comes to projecting our global power around the world, it's certainly harmful. As a result, many foreign policy analysts have already boldly declared that the days of American exceptionalism, that is, the belief that the United States is the only country uniquely vested in leading the world, are over. And accordingly, it is imperative that we cut through the partisan noise and examine the United States' status as the world's preeminent superpower by asking today's question. Is American exceptionalism on the brink of extinction? The answer is no, because the United States still maintains institutional advantages over its opponents, despite President Trump. First, its status as a naval superpower. Second, its ability to project soft power around the world. And finally, its ability to have unique demographic positions. Now, you see, the United States naval power has always been one of the strongest in the world. And the first reason why it seems as if American exceptionalism isn't on decline is because of the United States' strong naval capacities. Now, before that, we have to understand just how strong the US Navy is. The Council on Foreign Relations explained in a backgrounder from December 26th of 2019 that the US Navy is by far the strongest in the world, both in terms of a budget and institutional capacities. Take, for example, when it comes to naval ship air carriers. While most countries only have one, including our opponents, like Russia and China, the United States has 12. In other words, we have 12 things that are functionally aircraft carriers that can be flown anywhere around the world. And while this is only one example, it points to a broader trend, one of the United States' naval preeminence, which is why the Congressional Research Service explained on February 26th of this year that as long as the United States Navy remains as dominant as it is, the United States will have access to 75% of the world, wherein we can control shipping routes and trade routes and project our naval power anywhere we want, from places like Somalia to North Korea to China, all the way back to Mexico. And consequently, insofar as the United States maintains its status as a naval power, something which seems likely for the future, only the US is capable of protecting innocent fishermen from Somali pirates or people from the expansionism of China. And consequently, US exceptionalism is not on the brink, but instead is only growing as our Navy does. Back in the 1970s, acclaimed political scientist Richard S. Neustadt coined the term soft power. That is, a country's ability to project cultural, economic, and diplomatic influence around the world. And here we can see the second reason why American exceptionalism isn't on the brink of extinction has to do with the American ability to project soft power. You see, in his book, The Post-American World, acclaimed political analyst and author Fareed Zakaria explained that after the advent of World War II, when the entire international community was in disarray, the United States was there to pick up the pieces, forging many institutions like the World Trade Organization and the World Bank Organization. And consequently, not even President Trump could undo decades of goodwill from his predecessors, many of whom other countries trusted because of the United States' stance as a preeminent democratic leader. And here we can look to some recent surveys, because as CNBC explained on February 26th of this year, in a survey of over 50,000 business professionals across 73 countries, the United States ranked #1 in the soft power index, both in terms of familiarity, comfort, and reputability on the international world stage. In other words, despite President Trump, most countries still trust the United States to lead the world fairly. And as such, we have to understand that exceptionalism is built on the idea that only one country is able to uniquely lead the world. And given the United States' strong demographic status, its strong economic position, and its decades of goodwill, something that nations like China and Russia don't necessarily have, then it's clear that only the United States is in the institutional position to lead the world stage and people all around the US. But finally, we have to look to the future and understand that demographics matter a lot. So the third and final reason why the United States is actually growing in terms of power has to do with its strong demographic position. To understand this better, we have to look to Peter Zeihan, a geopolitical strategist in his book, The Accidental Superpower. As he explained, demography is an important part of any country. If you have a population that is too old, well, that means you don't have enough young workers to support them, and the social services become unable to pay for, and your debt soars. On the contrary, if you have too many young workers and too little old folks, you will have massive unemployment rates. But luckily, the United States has found that middle balance, with Zeihan continuing. While most countries, including those in Western Europe, China, and Russia, are projected to have their populations actually shrink by 2100 or earlier, the United States has maintained a constant population growth rate ever since the 1960s. And even if we're running out of young people and people are less inclined to have babies, the United States remains the preeminent place to attract immigrants, which gives us access to millions of highly qualified people all around the world. And that's why the New York Times concluded on March 2nd of this year. Given the United States' demographic advantages, it doesn't have to focus on introspection and internal issues, but rather can project its influence elsewhere because it doesn't have to worry about the economy or soaring debt. And consequently, only the United States, unless the demography of other countries magically changes, is set to be the world's preeminent superpower for the long run. So, upon returning to the question at hand, is American exceptionalism on the brink of extinction? The answer is absolutely not, because despite President Trump, the US still has massive advantages over its opponents. And we can see this first, through its ability to project naval power all around the world. Second, because of its strong ability to project soft power, and perhaps most importantly, because of its demographic advantages. And so it seems, despite President Trump's ability to undo all of Barack Obama's legacy, If there's one thing he can't undo, it's decades of American goodwill from previous predecessors and American presidents. And consequently, the United States is, quite frankly, the only country capable of leading the world right now. Thank you.
Applause. Congratulations on making it to finals.
Thanks.
Hi, just a reminder to all the observers, please have your camera off and your mics muted.
Hello,
Hello.
Dan. Okay, great. Y'all can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you go ahead
Loud
and
and clear.
All right. I am your fifth speaker today, Catherine Rollins. And my question today is, has the time come for the United States to cooperate with China on the coronavirus epidemic? Let me just open my laptop for a timer.
Can you give us the question one more time? Give us the question one more time.
Has the time come for the United States to cooperate with China on the coronavirus epidemic?
Thank you.
All right, and I'll be keeping time on my laptop on timer if that's okay. Can all my judges just give me a nod when they're ready?
Ready?
Fantastic. With that, my time begins now. Cats in China have to be wary of things right now. According to the Kazan Times, a Pakistani newspaper, Chinese cats on the streets are being deported because the government is worried that they're going to contract coronavirus and spread it to Chinese citizens. And while the cats may be fighting back, it seems that they're not the only one with their claws out. Because according to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace of April 6, 2020, the United States and China are using this as an opportunity to squabble on an international stage, despite the fact this is the time where we need global cooperation the most. China continues to blame the US for the virus, even issuing propaganda to argue such a thing. And at the same time, President Trump continues to refer to it as the Chinese virus, saying that that's not at all offensive to China. Unfortunately, both countries need to put their egos aside in order to address the pandemic. So considering that with 2 people in New York dying in the time it takes me to give this speech because of the coronavirus, it's an issue of national significance that we ask the question, has the time come for the United States to cooperate with China on the COVID-19 epidemic? And the answer is that it absolutely has, because that's in the best interest of the world for 3 reasons. First, because it increases medical research. Second, because it can alleviate loan debt from China. And finally, because it aids in conflict prevention. The United States and China both have world-class biomedical research facilities. Unfortunately, it seems that the only thing that isn't infectious right now is cooperation. The first reason as to why it is time for the United States to cooperate with China on the COVID epidemic is because it would increase medical research. Medical research has been stopped by US and China infighting. And although a lot of it is the Chinese's fault, it's also Americans too. As Foreign Policy magazine of April 6, 2020 explains, since the 2018 trade war, the United States has blocked or tried to block China from the CDC's Asian Cooperation Center, Africa's Center for Disease Control, and the Global Health and Security Initiative, 3 major groups being used to combat the epidemic right now. As long as China is out or on the outskirts of these organizations, the place where most collaborative research is happening, they're not going to be able to contribute meaningfully to a fight against the coronavirus, despite having the 2nd highest ranked medical research in the world. That's exactly why the University of San Diego's Center for US and China Policy recommends that what the United States needs to do is allow China into these organizations, call conferences in each of them, virtually, of course, and ensure that China can contribute not only with data and research, but when they do have a vaccine for clinical trials, manufacturing, and distribution. Taking this step would not only save lives around the world, but it saves American lives too. As the Kaiser Family Foundation explains just 4 days ago, by July of this year, 81,000 Americans are predicted to be dead because of the coronavirus. This isn't just a matter of foreign policy. It's a matter of life and death for the US. The United States has long fought against the China scheme of international investment. Unfortunately, it seems like it's our turn to invest in this relationship. The second reason as to why it's time for the US and China to cooperate on the COVID epidemic is because the US can alleviate China's loan debt. China has invested in loans across the world as part of the BRI, or Belt and Road Initiative. As Deutsche Welle, German newspaper, explains in April of 2020, China has spent or will spend by 2027 almost $1.3 trillion globally in over 70 nations. That makes this unprecedented. But unfortunately, China's calling on those loans right now. And with an economic shutdown worldwide, countries like Cameroon, Ethiopia, and others can't afford to pay it back. And so they go under or have to give cities away as collateral to the Chinese government. That's why Foreign Policy magazine explains on April 16th of 2020 that what the US government can do by cooperating with China, we can work also with the IMF on board with the Chinese government in order to try to alleviate loan debt or create slower repayment schemes for each country. Taking this step ensures that not only do developing nations not suffer, but that China still eventually gets repaid, something that's in their best interest as well. And that's not only good for us, the Chinese, and for developing nations, but for UN security as well. Because as the diplomat explains just 2 weeks ago, the United States is facing China taking complete control at the United Nations, in part because of their supremacy over loans and international aid. If we take action, we can stop that. The third and final reason as to why it's time for the US to cooperate with China is because it would prevent conflict. As the Andalou Agency, a foreign policy research center, explains further, just yesterday, the United States and China are quickly headed towards a hot war confrontation, meaning one involving military strength. Already, China has confronted 4 US ships in the Pacific. And at the same time, we're seeing a rising rate of international rhetoric suggesting military action. That's why we have to take action now. Chatham House explains further in April of 2020 that by increasing diplomacy, we decrease the odds of a hot war and save possibly thousands or millions of lives in the process. Because if we don't take action immediately, it would be catastrophic. As Graham Allison writes in his 2018 book, Destined for War, if the US and China don't work things out, we're, well, destined for war. So it's in our best interest to do so. In returning to the question, has the time come for the United States to cooperate with China on the COVID epidemic? The answer is yes. First, because of medical research. Second, because of loan debt. And finally, because of conflict. Although the US may still have our issues and have our claws out, it seems the only thing getting catty this time is neither the US nor China. All right, my time was 7:04.
Congratulations on making it to finals.
Thank
Digital.
you. And have a nice day, y'all.
Hello, I'm Angela Wang.
Hey, Angela, if you could give us your question.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, are US efforts to contain Iran succeeding or failing? So once again, pretty simple. Are US efforts to contain Iran succeeding or failing?
Awesome. Ian, David, are y'all ready?
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 And may I ask
Angela?
how time signals to be given?
I can give you time signals or you can time yourself, whichever you prefer.
Okay, I'll just grab my phone real quick then. Okay. In 2018, when the United States withdrew from the Iranian nuclear deal, Iran and Hassan Rouhani decided to massively retaliate by stating that he would cut off all travel restrictions of Americans to Iran. Right, because if there's just one place in the world that American tourists are dying to visit, it's Iran. And yet this seems that the antagonism between the United States and Iran has only been growing. The Brookings Institution notes in December 11th of 2019 that the way that Iran currently exerts its economic, political, and military influence across the Middle East is through something known as the Shia Crescent, in which they exert their influence through other nations across the Middle East, essentially involving themselves in their politics, their economy, or even the nation's military. Yet it seems that many now wonder if Donald Trump's recent aggressive moves against Iran are either being counterproductive or actually helping. But considering that if we're not successful in containing Iran, we could see a dangerous country with an entire nuclear arsenal take over the Middle East, we have to ask, are the US efforts to contain Iran succeeding or failing? The answer, unfortunately, is failing because our counterproductive measures have only bolstered their influence. First is by strengthening Syrian and Iranian ties. Second is by alienating Palestinian politics. And finally is by increasing their influence in the country of Iraq. Now, in the past, the United States hasn't actually done much when it came to the Iranian nuclear deal, especially after its withdrawal, and it completely alienated its partners. This is the first reason why the United States' recent actions have only increased Iranian influence throughout the Middle East and have failed to contain them, because they've bolstered Syria's economic ties with Iran. As first explained to us by BBC, from November 9th of 2019, that because Bashar al-Assad's regime is so corrupt, not a lot of nations in the world are all too keen to strengthen their economic relationships with the country. But fortunately, they've had Iran, which has been there the entire time to give them the vital economic support that they so need. Therefore, that's been one critical way that they've garnered influence, by being the predominant economic stability for the country of Syria. Unfortunately, America's recent actions are likely to only bolster this tie and their influence, in which we look towards the New York Times, which further explains to us from April 1st of this year that Donald Trump's actions, after withdrawing from the nuclear deal by imposing new sanctions, essentially dramatically increased the antagonism between the Western world and Iran. Because previously, when the United States was still in the nuclear deal, the European Union did upwards of 7.7 billion euros worth of trade with the country of Iran. But after withdrawing, the United States had increased this antagonism, forcing Iran to shift closer towards Syria. That's why that same article further quantifies that from 2018 to 2019, trade between the two countries of Iran and Syria increased by 600,000 barrels of oil every single day, demonstrating that as the United States' actions have isolated Iran, they've only grown closer to their allies by increasing their influence. Now, after allegations of sending missiles into Palestine and killing people, Israel stated that if anyone else were to spread these false accusations, they would face demise. Right, because it's always a great idea to deny murder by threatening death. And yet, this is precisely the second reason why the United States' actions have only increased Iranian influence, because we've now isolated Palestinian politics. As further explained to us by the Times of Israel, from September 2nd of 2019, that one critical way that Iran currently garners influence in Palestine is through their economic aid towards the terrorist group known as Hezbollah, which actually has a very strong political influence in the region of Palestine. The article quantifies that every single year, it's estimated that Israel actually sends $100 million worth of aid towards Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah is actually extremely extreme, in which they try to share power with the moderate Palestinian Liberation Organization. However, America's recent efforts have only strengthened Hezbollah and hence Iran as well. Because as further explained to us this time by the Jerusalem Post, from March 23rd of 2020, the Donald Trump's most recent Middle Eastern peace plan, in which he's cut off $200 million worth of aid to Palestine, and also has acknowledged Israel in the Golan Heights, has only further alienated Palestine and has increased anti-American sentiment as well as anti-Israeli sentiment. At that point, Hezbollah has only increased their grip onto the region of Palestine, which has, as a result, only bolstered Iran even more. However, the last and most important reason as to why the United States is failing to contain Iranian influence in the Middle East is because we're only increasing Iran's influence within the country of Iraq, which is further explained to us by Foreign Policy magazine from April 6th of 2020, that right now a critical way that Iran garners influence in the Middle East is through their military presence in the country of Iraq, in which they've already deployed troops and have fully integrated themselves into one of the paramilitary wings of the Iraqi military, in which they were literally allowed to tell Iranian officials, and rather Iraqi officials, how to conduct airstrikes and attacks. So the United States' efforts within the region have unfortunately failed. Because a Brookings Institution article further explained from March 31st of 2020 that recent airstrikes from the United States in the country of Iran, or rather Iraq, have actually killed civilians within the region. Unfortunately, this has meant that the Iraqi parliament has now advocated for the forced removal of American troops from the country. But what does this mean for Iranian influence? Well, the problem is that if American troops are removed from the country of Iraq, that means that the country of Iraq must rely on Iran and their military for any sort of protection when it comes to terrorist groups such as ISIS within the region, demonstrating that at the point where Donald Trump's airstrikes are now forcing Iraqi politicians to force American troops to leave, Iran can now fill a vacancy that America has left, bolstering their military presence in Iraq. So when we come back to today's question, are American efforts to contain Iran succeeding or failing? The answer is clearly failing. Their policies are counterproductive. First is by strengthening economic ties with Syria. Second is by isolating Palestinian politics. And finally is by increasing their military presence within Iraq. So if not a lot of Americans really want to visit Iran, it doesn't seem like that the relationship is reciprocated either. All right. Thank you so much.
Congratulations on making it.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna let the stream run for like another minute or so, just so that YouTube doesn't end, like gobble up the end of the video, and then I'll turn it off. But thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for observing, and fantastic speeches from all finalists. Congratulations to them one last time.
Congratulations, everybody.